On a Thursday afternoon, I had an unexpected meeting with my stepsister, Anne, which began my most wonderful and disturbing day ever. The house's silence was only disturbed by the calm ticking of the grandfather clock in the main room. I had been home alone, scrolling through television channels aimlessly, attempting to alleviate the boredom that had settled over me like a thick cloud. There were errands to run. My father and his wife, Catherine, were out running errands, leaving just me and at home. Normally, I enjoy having my own house, but recently things have changed. And I never really clicked. Even though we are almost the same age, we are quite different people. She is very structured and detail-oriented, whereas I am more laid-back. Today, my father and his wife, Catherine, left, leaving Anne and I alone in the house. Usually, that is fine with me, but not this time. Anne and I have never been close, despite being roughly the same age. We are extremely different. Anne is extremely organized and careful. She always has a plan. I prefer a more spontaneous approach to life. We only connected when we said hello and spoke briefly. We maintained a comfortable gap between us, but in recent weeks I detected a shift in her conduct. Her eyes would linger on me for a minute longer than normal. She was usually in the room, and she was a little too close for comfort. It was subtle, nothing noticeable, yet I felt like something had shifted. We had gone back to being more spontaneous with our lives, and we only really talked when we had to. We were still a bit distant, but I could tell her eyes were on me more often. She was usually in the room, and it felt a little too near for comfort. I couldn't get the notion that something had shifted, that we had this unsaid connection that day. I was in the kitchen scrolling through my phone. The sunlight was shining through the windows, making the space cozy. I tried to ignore the weird energy that seemed to be there whenever and was near. I assumed she'd been in her room all day, but when I heard footsteps behind me, I knew she was ready to walk in. "Hey, Anne," I said. There was an unstated sense. Between us that afternoon, I was in the kitchen looking through my phone, the sunlight flowing through the windows, a pleasant glow over the room, and I tried to ignore the peculiar energy that seemed to pervade the air whenever and was close. She had been in her room all day, or so I thought, but when I heard footsteps behind me, I knew she was about to make her presence known. "Hey!" Anne's voice broke the silence as she entered the kitchen. I looked up from my phone, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw Anne standing in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest. She appeared calm, but there was something in her eyes, a spark of something that made my heart race. I responded nonchalantly, attempting to preserve my composure. "What up?" She shrugged and walked further into the kitchen, her gaze never leaving mine. "Not much, just felt like going downstairs. It's relatively quiet." I looked up from my phone when I heard her enter the kitchen, and my heart skipped a beat as I saw her standing there with her arms crossed over her chest. She appeared peaceful, but there was something in her eyes, a spark that made my heart race. "What up?" I replied lightly, attempting to maintain my cool. "I simply felt like coming downstairs. It's fairly peaceful in here." "Yes," I agreed, placing my phone on the table. "Catherine and Dad won't be returning for a while." And looked at the clock, then at me, with a naughty smirk on her lips. I understand she talked in a provocative tone, which is why I came downstairs with a knot in my gut. I felt a mix of fear and excitement. Her stare had a peculiar character, a comical yet earnest light that attracted and perplexed. She approached. "Yes, it is." I agreed to place my phone on the table. "Catherine and Dad won't be returning for a while." And looked at the clock, and then at me, with a teasing smile. "I understand." She used a playful tone, which is why I came down. A knot tightened in my stomach, a combination of anxiety and excitement. Her stare had a peculiar character, a comical yet serious sparkle that grabbed and disturbed me. She approached the stove, took a glass from the cabinet, and filled it with water. She moved with careful elegance, every stride calculated, as if she knew I was observing her every move, which I was. I was drawn to her vibe, with her hair cascading over her shoulders and her lips making a knowing smile. "What are you doing here alone?" she inquired, sipping from her glass and leaning against the counter, her gaze on me. I shrugged. Stove took the glass out of the cabinet and filled it with water. She pushed forward in a way that suggested she knew I was observing her and was doing it on purpose. I was intrigued by her demeanor, with her hair cascading over her shoulders and her lips making a knowing smile. "What are you doing here by yourself?" she inquired, sipping from her glass and leaning on the counter, gazing at me. I shrugged, like I wasn't interested. "I'm only passing the time," I explained. She nodded and continued talking to me until they returned. "Your recent behavior has been unusual," and her statement threw me off guard. "What do you mean?" And turned her head and smiled slightly. "I'm not sure why you're avoiding me. I'm not avoiding you on purpose, but I could have unintentionally removed myself from you." I blinked in amazement at her comment. I hadn't intended to avoid her, but I suppose I had done so without recognizing it. It was difficult for me to pretend I wasn't disturbed. When she asked about Anne, I nodded and smiled slightly. I wasn't sure why she was acting this way, but I assumed there was some tension between us. I wasn't trying to avoid her, but I'm not sure how to handle it. I claimed I wasn't avoiding her, but I sounded hesitant. She raised an eyebrow and placed her drink down as if she were present. I shuffled in my seat, unsure what to do. I maintained my distance, but something had changed. I sensed the tension between us and wasn't sure how to manage it. I wasn't sure if I was dreaming things or if she felt the same way. I attempted to ignore it, but I couldn't. I was distracted. She spoke, but her explanation was not compelling. Anne's smile widened as she approached, and her eyes shone with something I couldn't put my finger on. She was so busy that she didn't have time to speak with me. Her speech was lengthy. I had no idea how to answer. I wasn't sure if it was just me or if she felt it too, but I've been trying to ignore it. I've been distracted. She spoke quietly, aware that her explanation was not particularly convincing. Anne's smile got broader as she moved closer, her eyes glowing with something I couldn't quite put my finger on. She was so busy that she couldn't converse with me. Her voice was light, but I could see she was serious, and there was something she wasn't saying. "And I'm not avoiding you," I said, my voice softer, and less sure as she got another step closer. Her body was just a few feet from mine, and the tension in the room got more intense, generating an electric atmosphere. My heart was beating incredibly quickly, and I swallowed hard to keep from getting nervous. "I think you're her," she murmured, her eyes meeting mine, but I didn't feel any duty to concur. I blinked, astonished by what she'd said. The room felt increasingly claustrophobic, the distance between us getting smaller with every second. Anne's presence was overwhelming, making it impossible to think clearly. I stated I'm not. "Sure, I get what you mean, but it felt like I couldn't think straight." "I think you're her," she said, staring at me, "but I'm not sure." I blinked, astonished by what she said. The room felt smaller, and we were closer. Anne's presence was powerful, and I had a hard time thinking. I stated I didn't comprehend what she meant, but it appeared like she was getting closer to me, and I could feel the heat from her body. My pulse was quick, and I attempted to understand what was occurring. This was my stepsister, with whom I had lived for years. Yet in this moment she didn't feel like herself. She didn't act like a sister at all. She seemed entirely different. "There's no need for pretension, Alex," she said quietly. "I know you experienced it too." I paused, my breath trapped in my throat as her words set in. She was right. I had felt the tension, the unsaid connection that had been building between us for weeks. I had tried, as she seemed utterly different. "There's no need for pretension, Alex," she replied quietly. "I know you experienced it as well." I held my breath, trapped in my throat, as her words resonated. She was right. I had felt the tension, the unsaid connection that had been building between us for weeks. I had tried to reject it, to convince myself it was a fluke, but now with her standing so near, her eyes riveted on mine, denial was no longer an option. I started to speak, but my voice faltered. I couldn't articulate a coherent thought. Then Ellen's fingers moved, gently brushing across my arm. The slightest contact sent a jolt of electricity through me, speeding my pulse. "You don't have to say anything," she said, a knowing smile widening. Over her lips, "Just quit pretending." Before I could say anything, and leaned close, her lips barely touching my cheek. It was a simple gesture, almost innocent, but it set off a firestorm in me, the truth of the moment overwhelming me. proving that it was more than just don't say anything. She offered me a knowing smile and a gentle nod. Stop pretending, or I'll stop, and leaned down to kiss my cheek. It was simple, but it made me feel emotions I didn't realize I could have. I was certain that this wasn't simply in my head. This unsaid tension, this irrefutable connection, was genuine. And felt it too, and there was no going back. Her lips lingered on my cheek for a minute, a tease that caused my heart to race. I could feel the warmth of her breath against my skin, the gentle pressure of her lips, a ghost of a touch that told me and was into it, but she didn't say anything. I was caught up in the moment and didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to back away, but another part wanted to keep going. I wanted to investigate this. I was attracted, but I had no idea how to act, and did not move. And I genuinely want more from you. I'm at a loss for words. Part of me wants to distance myself before things get out of hand, while another part of me desperately wants her close. I want to investigate this attraction despite the fact that it is not meant to exist. She simply smiled that sweet grin that made my heart race. She inquired innocently, as if nothing was wrong, but we were plainly still nervous. I began to reply that we couldn't, but the words seemed empty. My head was spinning with confusion as I tried to make sense of it all. She flashed a warm, knowing smile that made my heart rush. She asked casually, as if nothing unusual had occurred, but the tension between us was palpable. It was like the crackling static electricity in the air. I began to respond, but we can't. But the words were hollow and lacking of conviction. My thoughts raced with bewilderment as I tried to reconcile the inappropriateness of the circumstance with the unmistakable yearning that surged. This was wrong, right? My stepsister. Wasn't that wrong? But she moved again, stepping closer, her body brushing against mine. I could feel the heat emanating from her and the softness of her touch as she reached up and softly placed her hand on my chest. The event threw me off guard and filled me with great yearning. This is Anne, my stepsister. This was wrong, wasn't it? But then she stepped closer, lightly brushing against mine. I could feel the heat emanating from her and the softness of her touch as she reached up and gently placed her hand on my chest. My breath caught as a wave of emotions washed over me. Confusion, excitement, and an unnamed longing. Her gaze was fixed on me, a challenge evident in its depths. I swallowed with difficulty, seeking to clear my head, but it was impossible to think straight with her there. Her touch sent shivers down my spine. Do you understand? I was overcome by a range of emotions, including confusion, exhilaration, and an unnamed deep need. Her stare was riveted on mine, and I could sense the challenge in her eyes. I had trouble thinking clearly. With her so close, her touch made me uneasy. I attempted to talk, but my tone was unsteady and hesitant. Anne's hand went down my chest, and her fingertips drew a line that accelerated my heart rate. I softly asked her, "Do I inquire?" Her lips formed a cheeky smile. "Since it appears you've been wishing for this as much as I have," she stated. "Hit me hard. Were my feelings real? I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, but her touch made me feel emotions I wasn't aware I had. I felt guilty and excited at the same time, but there was also a tremendous sense of anticipation. I realized I had been waiting for this moment without recognizing it. I started talking, but my voice wavered, and took another step forward. I felt a shudder run down my spine as I considered it. I felt a feeling of shame pour over me, but there was also a rush of excitement. I realized I had been longing for this moment. I started talking, but my voice wavered, and made another step forward, forcing her body into mine. I could feel her heart beating rapidly against my chest. Her eyes were piercing. She radiated desire and curiosity, and it was impossible to look away. "You don't have to be terrified," she said, her hand slipping up to caress my neck and her fingertip gently tracing my jawline. "You don't have to pretend it felt like everything I knew was changing." I could feel her body pressing against mine. I could feel her heart thumping rapidly against my chest. Her eyes were piercing, and I could see she was full of want and curiosity. She said, "Don't be afraid." Her hands moved up to caress my neck, and her thumb touched my jawline. "You no longer have to pretend." I attempted to talk, but I couldn't. She shook her head, and with a gentle touch, she silenced me. Her fingers lightly brushed against my lips. "It's fine," she whispered. Her voice was calm and reassuring. "You don't need to say anything." Before I could resist, and leaned on her lips and kissed me tenderly and reassuringly. I attempted to say something but couldn't, and shook her head and caressed my lips with her fingertips. "It's fine," she said, her voice firm and reassuring. "You don't need to say anything." Before I could speak, and leaned in and kissed me. It was sweet and thrilling at first. The kiss was delicate, almost tentative, as if she was giving me the opportunity to back away, but I didn't. Instead, I kissed her back. My hands instinctively moved to her waist, bringing her closer. The kiss became more intense, gradually and purposely, and I felt a flood of warmth run through my body, kindling every neuron and sensation. Anne's hands gripped my hair, and her body pressed against mine, crushing my breath, but I didn't want to stop. This felt real, and it was exciting to be doing something out of the norm. When we parted ways, we were both still breathing deeply. I was with and it felt great. We were breathing hard, and time seemed to stand still. Then we were on the ground, and I could breathe again. I was astonished, so I said something to Anne. She smiled at me, and I felt my heart race. "How does it feel like?" "I'm not sure, but it seemed like everything changed." Our tension had been building for a while before it suddenly burst. I was nervous, but also excited. I'm not sure how to express it. When I glanced at her, my eyes were filled with a mix of excitement and trepidation. I took a deep breath, but my thoughts were still confused. I wasn't sure how to respond. It felt like everything had changed, like the tension we'd been building had finally detonated, but it also felt irreversible, like there was no turning back. I just didn't know. I admitted, "I don't know," and I'm holding her waist. This comparison cannot be accomplished with my hands. I noted that her smile wavered, but she did not withdraw. Instead, she stared at me with such intensity that my heart began to race. "Why not?" she inquired gently. "Why see can't we?" Her comment sent a rush of perplexity and exhilaration through me. I'm not sure what just transpired. I admitted that my hands were still on her waist, but we could not do this. Anne's smile changed, but she did not remove her hands. Instead, she stared at me with such intensity that my heart raced. "Why not?" she asked quietly. "Why? Can't we?" Her comments sent a rush of perplexity and exhilaration through me. This was terrible. It had to be, but the way she looked at me and kissed me made it all feel so genuine and undeniable. "You're my stepsister," she added, her voice weak. It sounded like a justification rather than an explanation, and raised an eyebrow, her grin returning as she inquired, "What's going on?" I knew it was bad, but I couldn't help but notice how genuine she appeared and felt. "You're my stepsister," and arched her brow and smiled as she questioned. "You mean there is no biological connection between us? We're only two people. Don't let that stop you from doing what you want." Her rationale was a little perplexing, but she was correct. We weren't biologically related, but we were connected by our parents' marriage. Nonetheless, the gravity of the situation was clear. Her tone was mild yet forceful. We were unrelated, yet our parents' marriage brought us together. That relationship was crucial. But how about them? How about Dad and Catherine? When I asked, her smile faded, and she groaned gently. She took a step back to give us more space. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice quiet, "but I know I don't want to pretend like nothing's happening between us." And said, her voice quiet but firm. I felt a wave of emotions wash over me. Guilt, confusion, and something deeper, something I wasn't ready to name. What could we do? She was right. We couldn't keep pretending. Our tension had been growing for too long now that it had surfaced. There was no going back. I don't know if we just ignore this. I set my mind still reeling, and nodded, her eyes softening. "We don't have to figure everything out right now. We can take it one step at a time," she said. Her words brought a strange sense of calm to the storm raging inside me. She was right. We didn't have to have all the answers. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension in my chest begin to ease. "Okay, one step at a time," I said softly, and smiled a genuine smile this time. and the sight of it made my heart swell. "We figured it out," she said quietly, that right off the bat we had to be real with ourselves and each other about what was going on. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension in my chest start to ease. "Okay," I said softly, one step at a time, and smiled a genuine smile this time, and the sight of it made my heart swell. "We'll sort it out," she murmured softly and together. And at the time, I believed her, but the narrative wasn't done. In the days after that explosive encounter in the kitchen, I was in a cloud of expectation and dread. The tension between Anne and me only grew, fueled by the memory of our forbidden kiss and the undeniable shift in our relationship. We attempted to appear as if nothing had changed, but it was difficult. When we were in the same room, the air crackled with unspoken passion, and every unintentional touch sent thrills down my spine. I could see the same intensity in Anne's eyes, a magnetic draw that drew us in even if it wasn't safe. About a week later, I was sitting on the couch in the living room, trying to watch TV, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I wanted to accomplish. I could hear and moving around in the kitchen, but all I could hear was metal against metal. We were getting along okay, but something about it seemed odd. I couldn't put my finger on anything, but I couldn't quit thinking of her. I felt restless and couldn't concentrate on the television. I could hear and moving around the kitchen, as well as the clinking of plates and cupboard doors closing. It was like a symphony of domesticity, yet it was not relaxing. My parents and Catherine were gone, so the home was very quiet. I could feel my uneasiness increasing. I could not quit thinking about it, and I couldn't stop thinking about how she looked at me. The dishes and the quiet closing of cupboard doors made me uneasy. My parents were gone, so the house was peaceful. I couldn't stop thinking about Anne. I remembered her lips against mine, how her touch felt, and how it felt to be alone with her. As I prepared to go from my room, I became increasingly attracted to her, and stepped out of the kitchen, wiping her hands with a dish towel. The more I thought about it, the more I felt an undeniable attraction for her, and emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands with a dish towel, just as I was about to leave for my room. She paused in the doorway and stared at me, and I felt a rush of eagerness. "Are you okay, Alex?" she asked. Her tone was soft, yet with a trace of anxiety. I nodded, and she entered the living room, threw the dish towel on an adjacent chair, and sat down. She paused in the doorway to look at me. I was excited, and I could see she was nervous, too. "Are you okay, Alex?" she inquired. Her voice was gentle, but she appeared concerned. I nodded. She entered the living room, threw the dish towel onto a chair, and sat down on the couch a few feet away. The air between us was filled with unspoken desires. My heart was racing, and she stared at me as if she wasn't sure what to say. I didn't know what to say because I'd been thinking about her and our relationship since that night in the kitchen. I struggled to voice those emotions and accept that our friendship had evolved into something more. Eventually, I expressed what I was thinking, but Anne just stared at me. She was determined, and I agreed that we should just be silent for a moment. I could sense the tension in the air. We were attracted to one another, and I worried that if we didn't leave soon now, we'd do something reckless. I wasn't sure if I was ready to take that step, despite the fact that my body appeared to be in control. I leaned over to her, drawn in by the sensation of an unseen force bringing us closer together, and Anne's eyes confirmed it. With my need, we decided to take things slowly, and I muttered, my voice quivering with anticipation, and grinned, understanding what I was feeling, and I felt my heart race. We were moving softly, and she responded gently, but it didn't change anything. "We're going slow," and gave me a knowing smile, which made my heart rush. She stated we should be aware of the current situation, but it doesn't mean we should disregard it. Her words energized me, and before I could stop myself, I leaned in closer, bringing us even closer together, and approached me, and we exchanged a delicate, timid kiss. It was comparable to our earlier experience. However, we should forget about the current predicament. Her remarks piqued my interest, and before I could stop myself, I leaned in, bringing us even closer, and approached me, and her lips brushed mine in a delicate, tentative kiss, just like the first time, but without the uncertainty. This time, it was just the two of us, and we sensed the unmistakable connection that had been developing for weeks. The kiss grew firmer, Anne's hand reached up to stroke the back of my neck, bringing me closer to her. My heart was racing, and my skin felt electrified from the intensity of the situation. It felt as if the world had vanished, leaving only the two of us. We were caught in a storm of forbidden longing. When we finally separated, we were both panting and trying to cool down with our foreheads touching. It appeared that the world had vanished, and for a brief while, we were only left with our two selves, both breathing heavily, our foreheads meeting, attempting to calm down. It felt like we were the only ones in the world. I implored her to stop, but I was barely speaking, and my words were empty. My hands remained on her waist, and I could not let go, and smiled warmly as she touched my cheek. Do you truly want to stop her? Were we the only ones in the world? I ordered her to stop, but my voice was hardly audible next to her muttering. My hands remained on her waist, and I did not want to let go, and smiled warmly as she touched my cheek. Do you truly want to stop her? She asked. Her voice was a whisper, and it made me shudder. I began to shake, and I could feel my heart racing rapidly against my ribs. I wasn't sure, so I told her. She sighed and said she didn't want to complicate matters. Her forehead remained against mine, and our breaths intertwined. I don't know what to do, but I'm with her. I felt like I was on the verge of something new, like I was discovering a hidden connection that was just waiting for the proper moment to reveal itself. I'm not sure what to do, but I'm with her. I mumbled something barely above a whisper, and she leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. We made a quiet promise. I don't know what to do, but I'm with her. I felt like I was on the verge of something new, like I was discovering a hidden connection that was just waiting for the proper moment to reveal itself. I'm not sure what to do, but I'm with her. She sighed, indicating that she did not want to complicate things further. Our foreheads were still touching, and our breaths mixed in the space between us. I understood what she stated in her voice, but maybe we weren't complicating things. Perhaps we were simply exploring the unknown. Her remarks felt like a glimmer of truth in the chaos. It didn't feel like a mistake. Despite the negative aspects of our relationship, the space between us felt like an awakening, as if we had finally discovered a latent link waiting for the proper opportunity to develop. I'm not sure what to do, I said, my voice barely audible, and leaned in, her eyes locked on mine, and she uttered a quiet promise. It was an intense and wonderful dance of yearning, and then I exchanged looks, and before I could say anything, she kissed me. It was a powerful kiss that triggered a torrent of emotions, releasing all the longing we had both been suppressing. We surrendered to the moment, our bodies entangled and our souls connected. It was a thrilling, terrifying, and liberating dance of forbidden desires. Our feelings were so intense that the moment faded quickly, but it didn't seem to mind. It was a shared experience, and we acknowledged the link that held us together, and gave a mischievous smile, and it was a passionate dance of desire. Our feelings were so intense that the moment faded quickly, but it didn't seem to mind. It was a shared experience, and we acknowledged the link that held us together, and smiled playfully as she left, vowing to handle the matter. She left me feeling thrilled and wanting more. I agreed, but I realized how complicated the matter was. We'd crossed a boundary and entered unexplored terrain. With no way to retreat in the days that followed, I recognized how serious things had become. We were in this strange state of normal and extreme awareness. Every gaze, touch, and shared moment felt intense. Even if we didn't discuss what happened, our connection was clear, like an unseen thread that ran through every interaction. I attempted to stick to my usual schedule, but the world seemed different, sharper, and more vibrant. I was acutely aware of Anne's every action. It was a strange combination of usual and heightened. Every glimpse, touch, every shared moment was filled with intense emotion. We didn't discuss what happened, but our relationship was clear in every interaction. I attempted to stick to my usual schedule, but the world was different, sharper, and more lively. I was acutely aware of Anne's presence, her every movement and breath. The atmosphere was thick with unsaid wants, making each encounter a delicate game of expectation and terror. We were back at home alone about a week later. My father and Catherine were out to dinner, leaving us in silence, which intensified our concealed feelings. I sat at the kitchen table pretending to be interested in a magazine, but my thoughts were on and the recollection of her kiss and the forbidden need. A week or two later, we were alone again, and I could feel the tension in the air. My father and Catherine were gone, so we sat there in solitude. I could not quit thinking about, and I felt a rush of emotion and realized I needed to talk to her. I put down the magazine and felt my heart race. I knew the conversation was coming, but I was nervous. I replied, "Yes, we need to talk." My voice shook. That made me think, and entered the kitchen, moving as if she owned the room. My heart raced as she sat across from me. The weak light made her shadows appear to be casting a spell. She said, "We need to talk," in a polite yet forceful tone. I put down the magazine. Even though I knew the conversation was coming, I was nervous. We could no longer deny the fact. "Yeah, I understand," I answered, my voice indicating how nervous I was. Elin leaned forward with her hands on the table. She didn't say anything for a minute, but looked at me, as if she was trying to think of something to say. The quiet was so heavy that it felt like we were holding each other's breath. She said, "I don't know what to do," her voice reflecting how nervous she was. She claimed she was unsure of what we were expected to do. I nodded, swallowing hard. My mind was trying to think out what to say, but I hadn't dealt with this subject yet, so I was unsure.